Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to EB Yoga. Today's class is What's Up with Warrior? Warrior 1, 2, 3, and we also have a high lunge pose that looks a lot like our Warrior 1. So I'd like to go over these poses today, what makes each one different, what is the most important thing to be focusing on in these poses, and I'll give you a hint, it's not where your feet line up. I taught these poses for years in a certain way, and it's the way they're taught in like 90% of yoga classes out there. But I would like to show you why I teach these poses the way I do at EB Yoga, and maybe give you something to think about to make these poses more comfortable for your body. You'll need 2 blocks for class today, and that's it. We'll begin standing up. In our warrior poses, there are 2 main actions we're looking at here in our hips. The first action, hips squared. My hips are facing forward, same direction in my shoulders, same direction as my knees. You will most often hear this in lunges, warrior 1, warrior 3. In all of those poses, I will say hips are squared up toward the top of your mat. So your shoulders, your hips, your knees are all looking toward the top of our mat. And then we may do different things with our feet and our legs, and we'll get there in a second. For warrior 2, we call that an opened hip, and it's usually open toward the long side of your mat. So one of your knees is going to open, so you see my knee, my hip opens. Did you see how that also moved my torso a little bit? And we'll get there in a second at warrior 2, but just so you understand that, warrior 1, lunges, warrior 3, our hips are facing the same direction. Warrior 2 is kind of the weird cousin here. Let's look at high lunge and compare that then to warrior 1. Hips squared forward toward the front of your mat. Beginning with high lunge, right foot forward, lunge your left leg back. Right knee over the right ankle, maybe a little bit behind it, not crunching forward over top of the ankle. The back foot, you're on the ball of the back foot. Your heel is not flat. This is a balancing pose, and feel free to have a bend in that back knee. The straighter I try to force that leg, the more strain I feel up in my hip joint. We want to be working our muscles, working on our balance. We don't really want to be straining here. You might find a little stretch, but you don't want it to strain. So hips are still looking toward the front. Hands can be on your hips. You can reach your arms overhead. High lunge. To come into warrior 1 from high lunge, I hop my back foot in a little bit so that I can press my back heel flat. So my hips are still squared toward the front of my mat. The only difference here really is my back foot is flat, and I made my stance a little shorter. I brought my legs closer together. I still have 1 foot in each lane of my yoga mat, which I did in high lunge. I might not have mentioned that, but 1 foot in each lane of the mat helps for balance. You may see people bring their feet closer to warrior 1, more like they're walking a tightrope. To me, I feel more strain in my left hip here, and I start to feel something in my lower back. My lower back starts to get into this pose, which we don't want. So to me, when I widen this up, more room in my hips, more room in my lower back, much more comfortable in my body. Again, hands on hips or arms overhead. From warrior 1, moving into warrior 3. Warrior 3, hips are still squared toward the front. I'm going to take my back foot and come back toward my high lunge. Warrior 3, I start to tip forward. I find my blocks, extending my left leg back. Not locking the right knee you're balancing on. If I lock that knee, I'm much more likely to lose my balance and face plant. Hands here on blocks, or you can work on balance here. But my body is squared up toward the top of my mat. Check in with that back leg that you're not opening up the hip like this. Hips are squared, the leg just reaches back. And drop your back foot down. Maybe give your hips a little shake. Let's check out those poses with the left leg. Again, hips are squared forward to the top of your mat. Left foot forward, right foot back, find your lunge. Bend your left knee, check in where it is, on top of the ankle or a little bit behind it. Back right leg, little bend in that knee. One foot in each lane for balance and hips squared forward toward the front of my mat. Moving into warrior one, that back foot, I hop it in a little bit, just enough so I can get that back heel flat. And then if you need to change the direction your toes are pointing so that's comfortable in your ankle and your knee, you can change the direction. I like them both pretty much pointed toward the front. If it feels at all straining on the lower back, bring your feet a little bit closer. And again, hands on hips or arms overhead. And bring your hands down. Let's check out our warrior three on this side. So again, I like to be sort of in a high lunge, so I'm back on the ball of that back foot. Begin to tip towards your warrior three. Reach your hands for your blocks. Send your right leg back. Check in if your hips moved at all. So my hips should be squared and they should look pretty level, not opening one way up. Maybe a little balance here. And drop that back leg down. Give your hips a little shake. So let's take a look at warrior two. I'm going to start with my hips facing the long side of my mat, and I'll show you in a second here how that's not really how our hips stay in warrior two. Step your legs wide apart, and then take both of your feet and point them toward the right so that you start to bend your right knee. Same thing as warrior one, you don't want to be dipping really far past your ankle, knee on top of the ankle or maybe a little bit behind. Now see what this left hip is doing. If my knee is pointing at the wall, my left hip is angling. If my hips are squared toward the front here, toward the long side of my mat, that knee won't open up and point at the wall. Even where it is right now is straining in my hip. It's more like that, like it's pointing at the corner of my room. So even though teachers will say hips open to the long side of the mat, you really can't open your hips to the long side and get this knee to point at the wall without hurting somewhere in your hip joint or your lower back. So what I say is if you want to bend that knee and have it pointing toward the wall, let that left hip roll in a little bit. So the point of my hip is now facing toward the corner of the room rather than trying to get it here. Do you see the war that goes on with the hips and the knee? Prioritize the safety of your joints rather than what a pose looks like. That's all I got to say about that for now. Warrior two, add your arms and you look over your right fingers. See if you can relax your shoulders down away from your neck. And release your hands to your hips. Let's check out warrior two on the other side. Straighten your leg, turn your feet to look hips squared, and then just keep rotating them to the left. Bend your left knee and check in on the left side. If my left knee is over my left ankle, maybe make this a little bit shorter if that helps your lower back. On this side, I tend to crunch into my lower back more. Every side of our body's different, so your pose will probably be different on each side. I know mine is. Again, with the hip, it's kind of facing the corner of my room. It's not opened here to the front. If it is, then that knee and that hip starts to... You get my point now? Set up your warrior two so it's comfortable in your hips and your lower back, and add your arms. Release your hands to your hips, turn your feet back parallel, hips squared up toward the long side of your mat. And let's make our way down to sit. The main thing I stress in my warrior poses is that it should feel good on your hips and your lower back. If it's hurting your hips or your lower back, it's not worth it. Let's adjust the pose and make it look a little different. It's okay. We have to stop worrying so much about what poses look like and notice what they feel like in our bodies. And they should feel good. Yoga shouldn't hurt. You might notice I didn't say anything about lining this foot up with this part of this foot or anything like that. It's so much more important to take care of your hips and your lower back than to worry about where your feet are, in my opinion. Thank you so much for joining me for this class today, and I hope to see you again soon. Namaste.